Hello and welcome. This is the second of 4 videos that I've prepared in association with the English Literature and Creative Writing Department at Lancaster University. My name's Warren Mortimer. I'm a PhD student here at Lancaster. This video is titled The Exam as an Experiment. Here we look at ways in which we can treat our writing as a kind of task, as a kind of experiment. What do we aim to get done? What will our methodology be? This is a really good step in approaching the white page, approaching that kind of fear and anxiety that comes with any new piece of writing, no matter what stage you're at in your career. These are things that you can set yourself as targets. These are experiments that you can play with so that you enjoy the writing process. I've geared this towards any kind of creative writing exams that students might undertake, but you can really use this process for any piece of writing. The way that I've structured this is to look at the traditional aspects of narrative. We're going to be looking at form, at point of view, perspective. We're going to be looking at conflict and tension in a piece of writing. We'll have a look at voice, at diction, at tone, at colour of language, formality, informality. You can use these as a jumping off point to set an experiment. There's 5 traditionally, including time. We'll look at time a little bit later. These are the building blocks from which prose is made, so do use them to your advantage. If you're aware of these, then you'll know how to manipulate them. You'll know how to get the most out of your story by, say, changing the point of view around, speaking from a perspective that might seem alien or different to you. The picture speaks to my heart. Let's start with form. This could be something as mundane as a description, but when we blend genres, we're playing already with the expectations of the reader. We might, for example, instead of giving a description, instead of writing prose line for line, we might write a letter. It goes understated that writing a letter in this way makes you think in a kind of traditional mindset and creates a level of intimacy with whoever the letter is addressed to. We might write song lyrics or poetry, and by that I mean we might have song lyrics as part of our prose. A character might burst into song, or a character might read a poem in the newspaper. It's really important to see how that breaks up the prose on the page, and so writing something totally different but still engaging in the writing process can be really interesting here. Have a think about who we're writing for, and the form might suggest itself to you. How intimate are we with these people? If our character is writing for a lover, if they write that kind of letter as a news report, how interesting could that be? If they engage purposely in a level of formality that isn't traditionally associated with love. Equally, if we have a lawyer writing poetry, what does that say about our character? Another way to suggest these forms are whether we're working in a certain kind of genre. If we're working in the horror genre, do we expect to see letters there, as in Dracula? Maybe, but do we expect to see song lyrics there? You might say no, but Stephen King does that kind of thing all the time, and to his advantage. He reaps the sorrow and the horror from these song lyrics. If so, if we are working to a kind of genre, it's really good to bear this in mind from Edgar Allan Poe. A short story must have a single mood and every sentence must build towards it. Really do take that to the letter, that's my advice. Really do look back through sentence to sentence and ask yourself, are we still scared here? Is the tension still here? Is this still dark? Is this still gloomy? And if not, do we get rid of the sentence, or is there a good reason why? If there's a moment of beauty, what does that say about the work? Here's my Edgar Allan Poe. Point of view, this one's really, really, really interesting. Where's your camera at? Are we engaging in a close shot, a medium shot, a long shot? I like to think of a Netflix show for this. By my camera, I mean where is my narrator? Because for all intents and purposes, the person narrating this is going to be holding the camera. Let's say it's a god narrating this. The camera's going to be way back there. What if it zooms in on these people in this life? What if we create a close shot? What does a long shot say if we're talking about an entire village, an entire town, if we're talking about them generally, like in a novel such as Middlemarch? Does that lose intimacy compared to talking about one person close up, or does that create intimacy? It's all about levels of trust. Now, for the purposes of this writing exercise, objectively speaking, we can choose one of these for the exam. The question that you always want to ask yourself is, how close do you want your reader to be to your narrator? That might seem like a really obvious question, but I think it's really interesting if you think about the distance between us and the character. Do we want to be really close to somebody who's mentally ill? A psychopath, let's say, in a serial killer story? Do we want to be way back from somebody who's really likeable so that we only get snatches of them? All of these are questions to direct the writing, but do remember that whatever you choose, there's no right answer, and consistency is key. Stick to the shot you've chosen. I've got a couple of examples here of how these work. Now this one is in first person, and I'll show you what that does for the writing. You might know this is from Catcher in the Rye, it's the very opening. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, and what my lousy childhood was like, how my parents were occupied, and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. I don't feel like going into it, if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me, and in the second place, my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. Now, this first person here allows us to create this intimacy with someone who is otherwise quite distant from us, who's got the guards up, got the shields up, who doesn't want to be telling us about themselves. But because it's in first person, we're able to break through a few of those barriers. This one in third person creates another good example from Harry Potter. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Now the third person, and if you know the books or the films, as I'm sure so many of you do, the third person allows us to create distance from these characters. And when we know that Mr. and Mrs. Dursley aren't particularly nice people, you can see why the narrator would want to do that. To look at them and point at them and point out their flaws. To say that these aren't nice people, I don't want you to grow attached to them. So the third person is really interesting there. Here's one that's often difficult to explain, but that authors use all the time. The close third person. This is from Beyond Black by Hilary Mantel. In the centre of the room, Colette stooped, picked up Al's shoes. For a moment she disappeared from her own view. When her face bobbed back into sight in the mirror, she was almost relieved. What's wrong with me, she thought. When I'm gone, I leave no trace. Perfume doesn't last on my skin. I barely sweat. My feet don't indent the carpet. Now, you might notice in this one where we changed from third to first person. Very subtly, the author's got full control here. This is written in third person, as you can see from the first sentence. In the centre of the room, Colette stooped. And then there's almost a moment where a little turn happens right before our eyes, and suddenly we're in first person. We're right up in Colette's face and forced to acknowledge her, her desires, her opinion. Let me show you this effect in a more obvious style. I'm always losing my lunch money. That's first person. That's me speaking. Mike was the sort of person to lose his lunch money on a daily basis. He made mental reminders to be more careful next time. What am I like, he thought. Simple enough again, you might say. That's third person. I'm talking about Mike. Even when he speaks, what am I like, he thought. That's me telling you about him. That might seem really obvious, but look at this. Mike lost his lunch money on a daily basis. What was he like? Next time he was shopping, he'd be sure to buy trousers with zips. That'd do the trick. Who's speaking here now? Is this in first or in third person? What was he like? So we're talking about him, but really that's him saying that. What was he like? That'd do the trick. Is that me speaking as a narrator or him saying that? Very subtle differences that create this intimacy, this closeness with the character when we switch all of a sudden. If you have a handle over that, it can produce some really, really interesting writing. Let me talk to you about tension now. So much for point of view. Tension. This one's pivotal. You'll hear this word all the time. How do we get our readers from page 1 to page 2? What's driving them forward? Easy enough in a murder mystery. But how does this work in a poem, for instance? So, here's how you can appreciate tension and how I can show you it working in practice. Try this for an experiment. Keep your eye on the clock. Write for half an hour. And every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes or whatever works for you, finish your paragraph up and raise the tension up or down a level. You'll keep focused, you'll keep the pace going, you'll keep the drive of the narrative. The narrative won't have time to meander or take tangents. It will drive to its conclusion, I promise you. If you're struggling to get through a full piece, try this experiment and make sure that you end the story satisfyingly. Make sure that we reach some conclusion so that you know that every time you're in the tension, we have to reach a kind of climax. Here's a tip for you. Imagine at every moment you've only got 2 minutes left to tell the story. So you can only write down the important details. Don't waste time with the colour of the bush, but maybe tell me if someone's starting to sweat. Keep it in the mood, keep it in the genre. There's a trigger warning for this poem for assault, sexual abuse, rape. I want to show you this poem though because this shows you exactly on a small scale, a micro scale, how a poem can achieve this tension building. This is called The Scale of Intensity by Don Patterson, so there you go, it's all in the title. I'm going to read this poem for you. 1. Not felt. Smoke still rises vertically. Insensitive individuals, deja vu, mild amnesia. See like a mirror. 2. Detected by persons at rest or favourably placed, i.e. in upper floors, hammocks, cathedrals, etc. Leaves rustle. 3. Light sleepers wake. Glasses chink. Hairpins, paper clips displayed slight magnetic properties. Irritability. Vibration like passing of light trucks. 4. Small bells ring. Small increase in surface tension and viscosity of certain liquids. Domestic violence. Furniture overturned. 5. Heavy sleepers wake. Public demonstrations. Large flags fly. Vibration like passing of heavy trucks. 6. Large bells ring. Book burning. Aurora visible in daylight hours. Unprovoked assault on strangers. Glassware broken. Loose tiles fly from roof. 7. Weak chimneys broken off at roofline. Waves on small ponds. Water turbid with mud. Unprovoked assault on neighbours. Large static charges built upon windows, mirrors, television screens. 8. Perceptible increase in weight of stationary objects, books, cups, pens heavy to lift. Fall of stucco in some masonry. Systemic rape of women and young girls. Sand craters. Cracks in wet ground. 9. Small trees uprooted. Bathwater drains in reverse vortex. Wholesale slaughter of religious and ethnic minorities. Conspicuous cracks in ground. Damage to reservoirs and underground pipelines. 10. Large trees uprooted. Measurable tide in puddles, teacups, etc. Torture and rape of small children. Irreparable damage to foundations. Rails bend. Sand shifts horizontally on beaches. 11. Standing impossible. Widespread self-mutilation. Corpsant visible on pylons, lampposts, metal railings, must bridges destroyed. 12. Damage total. Movement of hour hand perceptible. Large rack masses displaced. See white. He's ended this poem, by the way, with a kind of trick that poets like to do where he's use the word white and then we go to white. Do feel free to steal that effect. I think every man and his dog has had a go at that. Now you might want to have a go at something like this poem. You might want to have a go at this to understand how tension works, how we build tension, how we keep the pages turning, and once you've written something like this, ask yourself where the weak spots are. And one thing that I want to stress is it doesn't always have to be so violent and in your face as is sometimes here. There are, even in this poem, moments of quiet that balance out the large-scale destruction. As in stanza 10 here, rails bend. Sol. As in stanza 8, sand craters, cracks in wet ground. Sometimes the silent and the gentleness of a poem can speak just as loud, or a piece of prose. Sometimes sand craters can unnerve us more than total annihilation. Talk about the macro, the big picture, but focusing on specific details in the micro, you won't go far wrong. Let's talk about conflict now. Successful story really is like a science experiment. I'm really sorry to labour my metaphors here. What we want to do in a story though is slam two elements, two characters, two objects, two biases, two opinions, 2 points of view against each other and observe the outcome. In something like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, this is very obvious. It's a kind of black v white, a good versus evil. Do have a think about the bottom two examples though. Where's the conflict there? If you know these, the film, the Batman film, The Dark Knight, and the Bronte novel, Wuthering Heights. Because sometimes this can be an internal kind of conflict. A person trying to come to terms with themselves. That can be just as satisfying for the reader, if not more so. I'm going to finally speak now about voice and diction. Whenever we're writing, we pop on a kind of mask. We become a character or a narrator. We step out of ourselves. In a beach scene, for example, if we're writing a scene on the beach, we might become an old person, or we might have a look at a wine collector. My question is, what does persona allow us to do? Why do we bother? Why do we bother pretending not to be ourselves? What does it mean to have control over a character or a cast of characters? Well, I'm going to show you how I've done this in a couple of poems. This one I speak in the voice of the Norse trickster Loki, and it's inspired by the fact that up until recently I'd never actually worked a washing machine before. It's a real admission to make, to say that. But you'll see what's going on in this poem. It's a poem about feeling that self-disgust and reflecting on how it feels to not know something that's common knowledge. This feeling that we're behind in some sense or reliant on others. This is Loki speaking. Loki comes clean. Still, I cannot reckon sport intensive from eco-cotton. And it turns out temperature counts, so once again, I'm a 12-year-old Leeds fan watching mum load whites into a holy of holies to spin confections from a bruise of grass. She called it a sin to touch the clothesline like it held electric. And I know I'm pathetic, but I saw you too, love, as Dean of the Machine, submitting Lambrini to miraculous gyrations, beheld yet ignored like a planet rotating, through clean starts, and the gel of feelings allowed to crust over did not make you stay. Only me, bent down, losing the plot, the drum loaded, powder on my palms. I create distance from myself to be confessional in that way. To admit things about myself, I actually take distance from myself. Here's another one. Here's a poem I wrote a long time back where now I'm the Norse god Odin. I'm going to read this first and then tell you why I took on this persona. There's reference here to a serial killer, Russell Bishop. A kind of content warning if you know about him as a serial killer. Odin and the Caterpillar. Wild Park, roasting hot, a caterpillar on the dashboard. Can't bear to witness a bug on the brink, so I scoop it out the window. In descent it learns a mode of flight. Feeling sure the hawthorn will sing the grub to sleep, I think of you, Russell Bishop, choking schoolgirls out in the woods, consigned to an eternal chrysalis. I am the breath of the ash and the elm. I will cherish these babes, cocoon their grubby fists between my hands. See them reborn as long-tailed blue and marbled white. Know this though, if the day comes when you confess, retreading your steps to bear witness to a metamorphosis in the wing-loud glade, expect the flutter of my breath on your neck, and before you turn, the birch's creaking spine. Why take on the God's eye view here? Well, a couple of reasons. The first one is that I want it to be threatening here. I wanted this to be a kind of vengeful persona, threatening this serial killer. It's a poem about comeuppance, it's a poem about justice, getting somebody back. And I didn't feel like I could say that through my own voice or in my own station. I had to invoke this kind of God figure here. Now, you might find that really difficult or unnerving in some sense. You might say that it's not the purpose of a poem to threaten, and I agree with you. And that's why I create that distance here. That's one thing that it allows you to do. The other thing is to make this horrible, violent setting beautiful, mythological almost, and so I want Odin to get a new identity here. I want him to be associated with butterflies. I want the beauty to shine through in the end of the poem in a way that I don't think I could have done had this been me making this speech. It tells us a lot about the speaker as well as it does about the action and the serial killer and the motive. Okay, I'm going to leave you with a mission. This is a task that we sometimes look at in class. It's the kind of thing that you might do if you came to study here at Lancaster. I've called this one aptly Google Maps. So you say, Warren, I've listened to the video, I've taken it all in, but I still don't know how to plan. How do I begin? I've had a go at a few of these experiments, but all that said, what do I write about? Good question. It's still really difficult. Make sure that you write for yourself though, write for the pleasure of it. And one way that I've found to approach this is to look at photographs as a prompt. It's hard to get hold of photographs that are interesting sometimes, so I've spiced this one up a little bit. I think that having events in motion, as you'll see in a moment, is so much more interesting and will grip you much more so. So, if you have access, open Google Maps. Do that now, pause this video if you like between the steps here. I'm going to talk you through this exercise. Okay, once you've opened Google Maps, you want to set the world to spin. Pull it round, rotate it. Get your hand in motion. Keep going. And then, at random, start zooming in. Pick a spot anywhere in the world, start zooming in. And closer until you can enter Street View. Get the little yellow man and pick him up by the arm and pop him down in a street. You should be able to see the streets around you now. Wherever you are, this is your photograph. What's just happened is you've spawned a character. You've created life where it wasn't there before. The person looking out in this distant country, that's your character. Now, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Jot down the first thing that comes into your mind. This will help you get an idea of character, and it will help you also get an idea of plot, of how to begin a narrative. Okay, first question. Answer for your character when you answer these questions. First question. Where was your character an hour ago? They're here now, but where were they an hour ago? As I say, take the time to pause this video and answer these questions. Do it on gut instinct though. Answer them straight away. Don't give yourself time to think about these. Secondly, is your character hungry? That's my second question. Is your character hungry? Third question. Is anybody with your character? Are they here alone, or is somebody stood with them? Fourth question. When did your character last have a shower or a bath? Are they looking forward to having a shower? Fifth question. You've got to be careful with this one. I want you to really carefully reach into your character's pocket and pull out their phone. I want you to have a look at their phone and tell me the last message that they sent to somebody. Write that message down. Final question. Where does your character imagine themselves in a year's time? How has the pandemic affected them? Where will they be in a year's time? Now you can keep asking these kinds of questions, very mundane questions as you saw from mine, very, very random questions. Notice the questions I didn't ask. I didn't ask about sex, the sex of the character. I didn't ask about age. I didn't ask about what they were wearing or how they looked. All of that will be filled in later. We're so used to making these broad assumptions about characters. Ask if they're sat down or stood up. Ask if their left leg aches. Ask if they've looked up at the sky and what they've seen. Ask if they're anxious about anything. All of these questions will create intimacy with your character. Thank you very much for listening to this video. I hope to see you in part 3.